The massive transport ship Times, convergence Times, drifted through the void between star systems, its hull gleaming with the advanced metals of a dozen different worlds. Inside the cargo bay that had been converted into a briefing room, representatives from 7 of the galaxy's most renowned hunting species sat in a rough circle. The air recyclers worked overtime to accommodate the different atmospheric needs of each species, creating a barely tolerable environment for all. At the head of the circle sat Commander Thek's Kar, a towering Vorthak whose chitinous exoskeleton gleamed under the harsh lights. His forearms gestured as he spoke, mandibles clicking with each word. The Nightshade has been spotted in the Kepler Nebula. 3 merchant vessels, gone without a trace. Only debris fields remain. A low rumble came from Grex, the massive Ursoid whose fur bore scars from 100 hunts, his bear-like features twisted into what might have been a grin among his people. Finally, a hunt worthy of the great pack. My claws have grown dull, chasing pirates and smugglers. This is not mere prey, hissed Velandra, her serpentine body coiled elegantly around her hover platform. The Naga's scales shifted color as her emotions fluctuated. The Nightshade has eluded hunters for 3 decades. It killed my clutch sister and 17 others on Proxima Station. The briefing continued as each species representative shared intelligence. The crystalline Zephyrite with their perfect memory cores. The quantum runners who could phase through solid matter. The Void Stalkers with their ability to survive in hard vacuum. Each brought their unique advantages to what everyone agreed was the most dangerous hunt in known space. Then Commander Thek's Kar's attention turned to the far corner where a lone figure sat quietly. "Human," he said, his tone carrying barely concealed disdain. "You have been assigned to this hunt by the Galactic Council. State your qualifications." Jake Morrison looked up from the tablet he'd been studying. At 35, he was unremarkable by human standards. Average height, brown hair going gray at the temples, lean build that spoke of hard work rather than genetic enhancement. Among these apex predators from across the galaxy, he looked like prey that had wandered into the wrong meeting. Jake Morrison, formerly of the Terran Colonial Marines. 15 years of military service, 10 years private security. His voice was calm, matter of fact. The Council felt human participation was required for diplomatic reasons. Grex let out a sound that was definitely laughter among his people. Diplomatic reasons. The great softskins want to pretend they belong among real hunters. "Your species has no natural weapons," observed Crix, one of the crystalline beings. His voice came from speakers embedded in his mineral body, each word perfectly measured. "No enhanced senses. No specialized hunting adaptations. Your inclusion seems inefficient." Jake nodded calmly. "That's probably true. I'm just here to observe and file a report." The dismissal was clear in every alien face. Some were more polite about it than others, but the message was universal. Humans had no business on a hunt of this magnitude. They were barely worthy of being called predators, soft creatures from a backwater world who'd stumbled into galactic society through luck and stubborn persistence. Commander Thek's Kar continued the briefing, outlining the Nightshade's last known position and behavioral patterns. The creature was massive, possibly the largest predator discovered in known space. It could survive in hard vacuum, apparently fed on the energy cores of starships, and possessed some form of adaptive camouflage that made it nearly impossible to track. "It seems to target ships carrying certain rare minerals," Thek's Kar explained. "Holographic displays showing the attack patterns. Quantum resonance crystals, temporal flux generators, consciousness transfer matrices. The pattern suggests intelligence, not just predatory instinct. Or it's learned to associate those energy signatures with prey," suggested Velandra. "Even simple creatures can develop complex hunting behaviors given enough time." The meeting broke up with each team assigned to different sections of the nebula. Jake found himself assigned to the smallest vessel, a light scout ship called the Times Wayfarer **. The message was clear. They wanted him out of the way where he couldn't interfere with real hunters. As the various ships prepared to launch, Jake made his way to the Times Wayfarer's tiny bridge. The ship's AI, a basic model that spoke in clipped sentences, brought the engines online. Destination: Sector 7G of Kepler Nebula. Estimated travel time: 16 hours. Warning: this sector has highest probability of nightshade encounter based on attack patterns. Jake settled into the pilot's seat and began reviewing the files again. But he wasn't reading the official reports or the tactical analyses. Instead, he was studying the debris field photos, the energy readings from the attack sites, the survivor testimonies from the few ships that had managed to escape. The other hunters saw a monster. Jake saw patterns. The attacks weren't random. The nightshade wasn't just a predator following instinct. It was smart, methodical, and it was learning from each encounter. The intervals between attacks were growing shorter. The ship selections were becoming more precise. Whatever this thing was, it was adapting faster than the hunters could respond. Jake pulled up the star charts and overlaid them with the attack patterns. There, a correlation the others had missed. The nightshade wasn't just hunting ships. It was following the trade routes in a specific pattern, always staying ahead of the pursuit fleets, always positioning itself where the hunting ships couldn't effectively coordinate. It was hunting the hunters. The Times Wayfarer Times dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of Sector 7G, and Jake immediately felt the difference. The Kepler Nebula was beautiful in a terrifying way. Vast clouds of glowing gas and stellar debris that played havoc with most sensor systems. Visibility was limited, communications were spotty, and there were 1,000 places for something large to hide. Jake activated the ship's passive sensors and began a slow drift through the sector. The other hunting teams were spreading out through their assigned areas, their powerful ships broadcasting sensor sweeps that lit up Jake's displays like fireworks. They were announcing their presence to anything with the ability to detect energy signatures. Meanwhile, Jake kept the Times Wayfinder Times running on minimal power, drifting like just another piece of debris in the nebula. He'd learned long ago that sometimes the best way to find a predator was to make yourself look like prey. Hours passed in silence. Jake's displays showed the positions of the other hunting ships as they swept through their sectors. Commander Thexkar's massive dreadnought Times Spear of Vengeance Times was making aggressive sweeps through the center of the nebula. The Ursoid pack ships were running in formation, their powerful engines creating enough disturbance to scare away anything within a dozen light minutes. Then Jake's passive sensors picked up something else. A shadow moving through the gas clouds, visible only as a brief distortion in the background radiation. Something large, keeping pace with the hunting fleet but staying just outside their sensor range. Jake quietly powered up his ship's analysis computers and began tracking the anomaly. The movement pattern was too regular to be natural stellar phenomena, too large to be another ship, and it was following the hunting fleet like a stalker sizing up prey. The nightshade wasn't hiding from the hunters. It was studying them. Jake activated his communications array and tried to reach Commander Thexkar. Static filled the channel. The nebula's interference was worse than expected. He tried the other ships with similar results. Whatever was about to happen, he was going to face it alone. The shadow in the sensor readings suddenly accelerated, moving toward the center of the hunting formation, where 3 ships were converging on what appeared to be a promising energy signature. Jake watched in growing horror as he realized what was happening. The energy signature was bait. The nightshade had learned to mimic the quantum resonance patterns that attracted hunting ships. It was using their own tactics against them. Jake pushed the Times Wayfarer's Times engines to full power and raced toward the convergence point, but he knew he was already too late. The 3 ships, 1 crystalline vessel, and 2 from the Void Stalker fleet, were moving into a perfect ambush position. On his sensors, Jake watched as space itself seemed to tear open around the hunting ships. The nightshade emerged from what appeared to be a fold in reality itself. A creature so massive that Jake's mind had trouble processing what he was seeing. It was like a cross between a manta ray and a solar sail, but made of some substance that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Tendrils hundreds of meters long whipped out from its central mass, each one crackling with energy discharges. The first hunting ship, a crystalline dreadnought called Times Harmonic Resonance Asterisk, managed to fire a single salvo before the nightshade's tendrils wrapped around its hull. Jake watched in horrified fascination as the creature seemed to drain the ship's energy core directly through its hull, the crystalline structure of the vessel growing dim and brittle before shattering like glass. The two Voidstalker ships tried to scatter, but the Nightshade was faster than anything that size had any right to be. It folded space around itself again, appearing directly in the path of the fleeing ships. More tendrils lashed out, and Jake's sensors registered massive energy spikes as the creature fed. In less than 30 seconds, 3 of the galaxy's most advanced hunting vessels had been destroyed. Not defeated in battle, consumed like snacks, Jake reached the edge of the kill zone just as the Nightshade finished feeding. For a moment, the massive creature hung motionless in space, its alien form seeming to pulse with absorbed energy. Then it began to turn toward Jake's small ship. Every instinct Jake had developed in 25 years of military and security work screamed at him to run. The Wayfarer Times was fast enough to escape, small enough to hide in the nebula until rescue arrived. No one would blame him for retreating in the face of something that had just effortlessly destroyed 3 capital ships. Instead, Jake killed his engines and let the ship drift. He powered down every non-essential system, reducing his energy signature to almost nothing. On his sensors, he watched the Nightshade approach, its massive form moving with a grace that seemed impossible for something so large. As it drew closer, Jake began to see details that the long-range sensors had missed. The creature's surface wasn't smooth. It was covered in what looked like scars or natural armor plating. Some of the patterns seemed almost geometric, as if they served a purpose beyond protection. And there were structures along its central mass that might have been sensory organs, or something else entirely. The Nightshade stopped less than a kilometer from the Times Wayfarer asterisk. Jake held his breath as the creature's tendrils moved slowly through the space around his ship, apparently scanning for threats. One tendril passed so close to the bridge that Jake could see the energy patterns flowing beneath its translucent surface. For several long minutes, the two very different predators studied each other. Jake remained perfectly still, watching and learning. The Nightshade seemed to be doing the same, its alien intelligence trying to categorize this small ship that showed no fear, made no aggressive moves, but also refused to flee. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, the Nightshade folded space around itself and vanished, leaving Jake alone with the debris of 3 hunting ships, and the growing realization that everything the galactic hunters thought they knew about their quarry was wrong. Jake activated his communications array and began broadcasting on emergency frequencies. It took nearly an hour before he managed to reach the remnants of the hunting fleet. Commander Thexkar's voice came through heavy static, demanding an immediate report. 3 ships lost, Jake reported simply. The Nightshade is not what we thought it was. Explain yourself, human. Jake looked at the debris fields scattered around his position, thinking about the creature's movements, its feeding behavior, its apparent ability to manipulate space-time. It's not just a predator, Commander. It's a sapient being. And it's been playing with us from the beginning. The silence that followed told Jake everything he needed to know. The galaxy's greatest hunters had walked into a trap set by something far more intelligent and dangerous than they could have imagined. And somehow, Jake was the only one who had survived long enough to figure out the truth. The hunt was about to become something very different. The emergency rendezvous point was a barren asteroid on the edge of the Kepler Nebula, chosen because its mineral composition would mask energy signatures from any pursuing threats. Jake docked the Times Wayfarer Times to the makeshift command station that Commander Thexkar had established using the modular components from his dreadnought. The atmosphere in the meeting room was tense when Jake entered. The surviving hunt leaders sat around a hastily assembled table, their earlier confidence replaced by barely controlled anger and fear. Half their fleet was gone. Ships that had survived battles against entire pirate armadas had been consumed like insects by a creature they barely understood. Commander Thexkar's mandibles clicked rapidly as he processed the situation. 3 vessels destroyed in under a minute. The most advanced ships in our respective fleets, equipped with the finest weapons and defenses our civilizations could provide. His 4 arms gestured at the tactical displays showing the attack. And you, human, survived by doing nothing. Not nothing, Jake corrected quietly. I observed. Grek slammed a massive paw on the table, his ursoid features twisted with rage. Observed while warriors died. While honor demanded action, you cowered like prey. The accusation hung in the recycled air. Jake could feel the weight of alien gazes on him, each species processing his survival through their own cultural lens. To the Ursoids, retreat without battle was cowardice. To the Vorthak, failure to assist allies was a betrayal of the hunt pack. To the crystalline beings, his actions were simply illogical. "The nightshade spared you," hissed Valandra, her serpentine form coiled in agitation. "Why would a predator ignore prey unless—" "Unless what?" Jake asked calmly. "Unless you made some arrangement, some deal to preserve your worthless hide at the expense of real hunters." The accusation of treachery rippled through the group. Jake saw hands move to weapons, saw the subtle shift in posture that preceded violence among multiple species. In a few seconds, the fragile alliance would shatter, and the hunt would end in bloodshed between former allies. "You want to know why I survived?" Jake stood slowly, his movements non-threatening but confident. "Because I treated the nightshade like what it actually is, instead of what I wanted it to be." Commander Texkar's head tilted, mandibles still. "Explain." Jake activated his personal tablet and projected the sensor readings he'd gathered. The holographic display showed the nightshade's approach, its feeding behavior, its apparent scanning of the Time's Wayfarer asterisk. Every species here brought their best hunters, their finest warriors, their most advanced technology. You approach this like a traditional hunt. Find the prey, corner it, kill it. Jake highlighted sections of the sensor data. "But look at the attack patterns. Look at the timing. The nightshade didn't stumble into an ambush. It set one." Crix's crystalline form shifted as he processed the data. "The energy signature that drew our ships to the convergence point. You suggest it was artificially generated?" "I know it was." The nightshade mimicked the quantum resonance patterns that our ships use for identification. It called our hunters to a specific location at a specific time, then eliminated them efficiently. Jake pulled up more data. "This creature has been studying us for weeks, maybe months, learning our tactics, our technology, our weaknesses." "Impossible," growled Grex. "You credit a beast with intelligence it cannot possess, can't it?" Jake switched the display to show the debris patterns from previous attacks. "Look at how the ships were destroyed. The nightshade didn't just kill them, it consumed their energy cores while leaving the hull structures mostly intact. It's not feeding on metal or organic matter. It's feeding on processed energy, the kind that only comes from advanced technology." The implications settled over the group like a cold fog. Valandra was the first to voice what they were all thinking. "You're suggesting this creature specifically hunts technological civilizations." "I'm suggesting this creature has evolved to hunt technological civilizations, maybe for thousands of years, maybe longer. It's not just intelligent, it's specialized." Jake brought up star charts, showing the locations of previous attacks. "Look at the pattern. The nightshade doesn't attack random ships. It targets vessels carrying specific types of technology, always in areas where rescue is unlikely and escape is difficult." Commander Texkar studied the data with growing unease. "If your theory is correct, then this creature represents a threat beyond anything we've encountered. A predator that specifically evolved to hunt spacefaring species could explain why so many promising civilizations simply vanish from the galactic record," Jake finished. "How many species have we lost contact with over the centuries? How many promising worlds went silent without explanation?" The meeting room fell quiet, except for the hum of life support systems. Each species was processing the implications through their own historical records, their own missing colonies, and lost expeditions. "Even if this is true," said Crix finally, "it doesn't change our mission. The nightshade must be stopped." "The question is how." "The question is whether it can be stopped," Jake corrected. "This creature has been hunting spacefaring civilizations for possibly millennia. It's survived every attempt to kill it, and it's learned from every encounter. The traditional approach, superior firepower, and advanced tactics, isn't just failing. It's making the creature stronger." Grex's massive form leaned forward. "Then what do you propose, human?" That we simply surrender our worlds to this monster? Jake was quiet for a long moment, staring at the tactical displays. I propose we stop thinking like civilized beings and start thinking like the only predator the Nightshade has never encountered, which is a human hunter. The dismissive sounds that followed were predictable. Jake had expected them. These species had spent generations perfecting their hunting techniques, developing sophisticated weapons and tactics that had made them apex predators on a galactic scale. The idea that primitive human hunting methods could succeed where their advanced techniques had failed was laughable. Human hunting methods are obsolete, stated Crix with crystalline certainty. Your species abandoned persistence hunting when you developed ranged weapons. You abandoned ranged weapons when you developed energy weapons. You abandoned individual hunting when you developed pack tactics. Why would we regress to inferior methods? Because the Nightshade has learned to counter every superior method we've thrown at it, Jake replied. It's adapted to energy weapons, advanced sensors, coordinated pack tactics, everything in our arsenal. But it's never encountered a human persistence hunter. Jake brought up a new display showing Earth's wildlife. Images of humans tracking animals across vast distances, wearing down prey through relentless pursuit rather than overwhelming force. My species didn't become apex predators through superior strength or speed or natural weapons. We became apex predators through stubbornness. We follow prey until it collapses from exhaustion. We track wounded animals across continents. We don't give up, ever. Even when every logical calculation says we should. Primitive tactics, scoffed Velandra. Your ancestors chased animals with sharp sticks. My ancestors chased animals with sharp sticks across thousands of kilometers, through every terrain and weather condition, never stopping until the prey collapsed. Jake's voice carried a quiet intensity. The Nightshade is used to being the persistent predator. It's never been persistently hunted. Commander Thexkar considered this. You propose to track this creature using primitive methods? I propose to track this creature using human methods. There's a difference. Jake activated his personal files, showing detailed analyses he'd been working on during the journey. The Nightshade leaves traces, not energy signatures or metal debris. Biological traces. It's alive, which means it has metabolism, waste products, maybe even a need for rest. The sensor data Jake displayed was subtle, easy to miss unless you knew what to look for. Microscopic particles in the debris fields, anomalous readings in the stellar dust, tiny variations in local gravitational fields. It's been moving through this nebula for weeks, following the trade routes, learning our patterns. But it's also leaving a trail, a biological trail that our advanced sensors are programmed to ignore because it doesn't match known technological signatures. Crix processed the data faster than the others. These readings suggest organic compounds, highly exotic but still following standard biological patterns. If you're correct, we could potentially track the creature's movements over extended periods. More than that, Jake said. We could predict its behavior. Biological creatures, even intelligent ones, fall into patterns based on metabolism, territory, breeding cycles. The Nightshade might be sapient, but it's still bound by biological imperatives. The mood in the room was shifting. The alien hunters were beginning to see possibilities they hadn't considered. But Grex remained skeptical. Even if we could track this creature, how would we kill it? It destroyed 3 capital ships without effort. We don't kill it, Jake said quietly. We exhaust it. The silence that followed was profound. In their various languages and cultural contexts, the concept was almost incomprehensible. These species hunted for quick, clean kills. The idea of wearing down prey over extended periods struck them as both primitive and somehow cruel. Explain, commanded Thexkar. Jake brought up biological analyses of the Nightshade's feeding behavior. It consumes massive amounts of energy when it attacks. Look at how it moved during the ambush. Those spatial distortions, the energy discharges from its tendrils, the speed of its attacks. That level of activity requires enormous metabolic resources. It replenishes those resources by feeding on our ships, Velandra pointed out. Exactly. But what happens if we deny it that food source? What happens if we force it to expend energy without providing opportunities to feed? Jake's fingers danced over the controls, showing projected energy calculations. Every predator has limits. Make it work hard enough, long enough, without adequate food, and even the nightshade will become vulnerable. The plan that emerged over the following hours was unlike anything the galactic hunting community had ever attempted. Instead of massing their remaining forces for a decisive battle, they would split into small, fast groups and begin a campaign of harassment. They would track the nightshade through the nebula, forcing it to respond to threats, always staying just outside its attack range. Death by 1,000 cuts, Jake explained. We make it chase us. Make it fight us. Make it waste energy on targets that aren't worth the effort. Eventually, it will either have to leave the nebula to find better feeding grounds, or it will become weak enough that our conventional weapons might actually damage it. It was a strategy that required patience, precision, and the willingness to play a very dangerous game with a creature that had already proven its lethality. Most of the surviving hunters hated everything about it, but they were running out of alternatives. As the meeting broke up and the various teams prepared for what might be the longest hunt in galactic history, Commander Thexkar approached Jake privately. "Human," the Vorthak commander said, his mandibles clicking thoughtfully. "Your species fascinates me. You propose to defeat the greatest predator in known space through persistence rather than power." "Persistence is power," Jake replied. "It's just a different kind of power than you're used to, perhaps. But consider this. If your strategy succeeds, it will not be because human methods are superior to ours. It will be because the nightshade has never encountered anything quite like human persistence. The element of surprise. Nothing more." Jake nodded. "Maybe you're right. But sometimes the only way to defeat a perfect predator is to become something it doesn't recognize as a threat until it's too late." The commander's chitinous features might have been smiling. "Indeed. Let us see if human stubbornness can accomplish what alien strength could not." 1. As Jake returned to the Times Wayfarer Times to prepare for the long hunt ahead, he couldn't shake the feeling that the nightshade was out there somewhere, watching them, learning from this conversation just as it had learned from all their previous encounters. The creature was about to discover what happened when humanity's oldest hunting instincts were unleashed against something that had never learned to fear persistence itself. The hunt began at dawn on the second day, if dawn had any meaning in the perpetual twilight of the Kepler Nebula. Jake piloted the Times Wayfarer Times through the outer edges of the gas clouds, following the microscopic biological trail that the nightshade had left behind. The other surviving ships maintained positions kilometers apart, ready to converge if the creature was located. It took 18 hours to find their first real lead. Jake's modified sensors detected a concentration of the exotic organic compounds near a collapsed star system at the nebula's heart. The gravitational anomalies there would provide excellent cover for a creature that could manipulate space-time. And the residual radiation would mask most energy signatures. "Contact," Jake whispered into his communicator. Though he knew the nightshade probably couldn't hear him, after 30 years of hunting technological civilizations, it might have developed sensitivity to radio transmissions. Bearing 27 Mark IV. Biological traces suggest the target settled here within the last 6 hours. The response came from Commander Thexkar, his voice tight with controlled excitement. "All units. Maintain current distance. Begin harassment protocol." On my mark. The harassment protocol was Jake's idea, adapted from human persistence hunting techniques. Instead of attacking directly, they would make themselves visible to the nightshade, force it to react, then disappear before it could retaliate effectively. The goal was to deny it rest, force it to waste energy on defensive maneuvers, and gradually wear down its enormous reserves. Mark. The first probe was conducted by one of the remaining Ursoid ships, the Times Iron Claw **. It emerged from the gas clouds at maximum velocity, powered up its weapon systems to full charge, then fired a single photon torpedo at the gravitational anomaly where they believed the nightshade was hiding. The response was immediate and terrifying. Space warped around the torpedo, swallowing it completely before it could detonate. Then the nightshade emerged from what appeared to be solid rock, its massive form unfolding like a nightmare made real. The creature had grown since their last encounter. The energy it had consumed from the destroyed hunting ships had been converted into increased mass and more powerful appendages. The Time's Iron Claw Times was already accelerating away at maximum burn, but the Nightshade's spatial manipulation allowed it to cover distance in ways that normal physics couldn't explain. Tendrils hundreds of meters long lashed out across impossible distances, crackling with energy discharges that would have vaporized any ship they touched. But the Time's Iron Claw Times had been ready for this. At the last possible moment, the Ursoid ship activated an experimental device that Jake had helped design, a quantum displacement generator that created a brief pocket of distorted spacetime around the vessel. The Nightshade's tendrils passed harmlessly through the Time's Iron Claw's time's position, striking empty space while the ship existed momentarily in a parallel dimensional slice. The creature's confusion was almost palpable. It paused in its pursuit. Great alien intelligence trying to process what had just happened. In that moment of hesitation, the Time's Iron Claw Times completed its escape, disappearing into the nebula's gas clouds. Phase 1 complete, reported Captain Grex with barely contained satisfaction. The beast expended significant energy for no gain. It will not expect such tactics. Jake monitored the sensor readings as the Nightshade returned to its hiding place. The creature's energy signature was measurably lower than before the encounter. Not by much, but the difference was detectable. More importantly, its behavior had changed. Instead of settling back into dormancy, it was moving restlessly through the collapsed star system, apparently scanning for additional threats. "It's agitated," Jake reported. "Good. Agitated predators make mistakes." The second probe came 4 hours later, this time conducted by Velandra's ship, the Time's Serpent's Kiss **. The Naga captain used her species' natural talent for deception, creating multiple false energy signatures that appeared to be a small convoy of merchant vessels. The Nightshade responded to what appeared to be easy prey, only to find itself chasing sensor ghosts while the real ship remained hidden. By the time the creature realized it had been deceived, it had expended considerable energy on futile pursuit. When it finally located the Time's Serpent's Kiss **, Velandra was ready with another surprise, a series of explosive charges that had been placed throughout the system during the previous day's reconnaissance. The explosions weren't powerful enough to harm the Nightshade directly, but they created chaotic interference with the local gravitational fields. For several crucial minutes, the creature's spatial manipulation abilities were disrupted. It thrashed through the debris field like a vast sea creature caught in a net, burning energy in frantic attempts to regain its usual mobility. Phase 2 complete, Velandra reported with cool satisfaction. The predator grows frustrated. Its movements become less efficient. Jake smiled grimly as he monitored the readings. The Nightshade's energy signature was now noticeably diminished. More importantly, its behavior patterns were becoming erratic. The creature was beginning to show signs of fatigue and irritation, emotions that could be exploited. The third probe was the most dangerous yet. Crix volunteered his crystalline vessel, the Time's Harmonic Convergence **, for a direct confrontation. But this wasn't a traditional attack. Instead, the crystalline being used his people's unique abilities to create a resonance cascade that interfered with the Nightshade's sensory organs. The effect was dramatic. The creature emerged from hiding in apparent pain, its massive form writhing as conflicting sensory input overwhelmed its nervous system. For the first time since the hunt began, the Nightshade appeared vulnerable, its movements uncoordinated and defensive rather than predatory. Crix maintained the resonance pattern for exactly 37 seconds, long enough to cause significant distress, short enough to escape before the creature could adapt. As the Time's harmonic convergence times retreated, Jake detected something new in the sensor readings. "It's learning," he announced with a mixture of admiration and concern. "The Nightshade is adapting to our tactics faster than we anticipated." During the fourth probe, conducted by Commander Thexkar's rebuilt command ship, the creature was ready for deception tactics. It ignored the false energy signatures, resisted the gravitational interference, and seemed partially immune to the resonance cascade. Worse, it had developed new defensive behaviors, creating spatial barriers that deflected attacks, generating false sensory echoes to confuse pursuit, and using controlled energy discharges to disrupt electronic systems at extended range. "The beast grows clever," admitted Thexkar after barely escaping the encounter. "It anticipates our methods." But Jake had been studying the creature's adaptation patterns, and he'd noticed something the others missed. Each time the Nightshade learned to counter their tactics, it required additional energy to maintain the new defensive capabilities. The creature was becoming more sophisticated, but also more metabolically expensive to operate. "It's working," he announced during the next tactical conference. "The Nightshade is adapting. But adaptation requires resources. Every new defensive capability it develops costs energy to maintain. We're forcing it to become more complex, which makes it less efficient." The harassment campaign continued for 3 days. Each probe was different, unpredictable, designed to force the creature into energy-expensive responses. The Nightshade grew more aggressive with each encounter, its attacks more powerful but also more desperate. On the 4th day, something changed. Jake detected the shift during routine monitoring of the creature's position. The Nightshade had stopped moving through the collapsed star system. Instead, it had positioned itself near the largest gravitational anomaly and appeared to be feeding. "Energy signatures are spiking," he reported with growing alarm. "The creature is consuming something, but there are no ships in the area." Commander Thexkar's voice crackled through the communication system. "Feeding on what?" "We've denied it access to any technological energy sources." Jake's fingers flew over his sensor controls, trying to understand what he was seeing. The energy readings were massive, far larger than anything a single starship could provide, and they were coming from the gravitational anomaly itself. "It's feeding on the collapsed star," Jake whispered, the implications hitting him like a physical blow. The gravitational energy, the quantum fluctuations, the residual radiation. The Nightshade doesn't just consume technological energy, it can consume stellar phenomena. The revelation changed everything. They had been trying to starve a creature that could feed on stars themselves. Worse, the gravitational anomaly contained enough energy to sustain the Nightshade indefinitely. Their entire strategy was not just failing, it was driving the creature to discover new food sources that made it virtually unstoppable. "All units, withdraw to minimum safe distance," commanded Thexkar. "Regroup for emergency tactical conference." But as the hunting ships began their retreat, Jake noticed something else in the sensor readings. The Nightshade wasn't just feeding. It was growing. The energy from the collapsed star was being converted into additional mass, new appendages, enhanced capabilities. In a matter of hours, the creature had doubled in size, and it was beginning to move toward the trade routes where civilian ships traveled in blissful ignorance of the threat approaching them. Jake made a decision that would have seemed impossible a week earlier. He broke formation and accelerated the Wayfarer times directly toward the feeding Nightshade. "Human!" Thexkar's voice exploded through the communication system. "What are you doing?" "Something stupid," Jake replied calmly. "Something so completely illogical that maybe it will work." As he approached the creature, Jake began to understand the full scope of what they were facing. The Nightshade wasn't just an apex predator. It was an ecosystem unto itself. Parts of its structure were clearly technological, integrated alien machinery from dozens of conquered civilizations. Other parts were biological, evolved over eons of predation. Still, other parts seemed to exist in states of matter that human science couldn't classify. It was beautiful and terrible, ancient and adaptable. The ultimate expression of predatory evolution, and Jake was flying straight toward it in a ship that couldn't even scratch its surface. The Nightshade detected his approach and began to turn, massive sensory organs focusing on the tiny ship that dared to interrupt its feeding. Jake could feel the weight of its attention, the alien intelligence that was trying to understand why prey would voluntarily approach a predator. Then Jake did something that no hunter in galactic history had ever attempted. He turned off his engines, powered down his weapons, and opened a communication channel directly to the creature. "I know you can understand me," he said quietly. I know you've been listening to our communications, learning our languages, studying our tactics. You're not just an animal. You're someone." The nightshade paused in its approach, tendrils moving slowly through space as if tasting Jake's words. "You've been alone for a long time," Jake continued. "Hunting civilizations, consuming their knowledge, never finding anything that could match your intelligence. Always the predator, never the equal." Space around the Time's Wayfarer times began to shimmer as the creature's spatial manipulation abilities engaged. Jake felt his ship being drawn inexorably toward the Nightshade's central mass, where feeding tendrils waited to drain his vessel's energy core. "But you made a mistake," Jake said, his voice steady despite the approaching death. "You assumed that evolution stops with predation. You never considered what might evolve specifically to hunt the hunters." The tendrils paused centimeters from his ship's hull. "Humans didn't evolve to be the strongest or the fastest or the smartest," Jake explained. "We evolved to be the most persistent. We are the predators who never give up, never stop hunting, never accept that prey is beyond our reach. And now you've taught us that you exist." The communication that came back wasn't in any language that human science had classified. It was pure meaning transmitted directly into Jake's consciousness. Bypassing his ears entirely, the Nightshade was speaking to him mind to mind, intelligence to intelligence. Asterisk. "Why do you not flee? Your kind always flees when they understand what I am." Asterisk. "Because fleeing won't solve the problem," Jake replied. "You'll keep hunting. Keep growing. Keep consuming civilizations until there's nothing left but you and empty space. Someone has to stop you." Asterisk. "You cannot stop me. I am eternal. I have consumed thousands of your kind." Asterisk. "Maybe. But humans have a saying. It's not the size of the dog in the fight. It's the size of the fight in the dog." Jake's hands moved to his ship's controls. "And brother, you just picked a fight with the most stubborn species in the galaxy." The explosion that followed lit up the entire nebula. Jake Morrison opened his eyes to find himself floating in a pocket of breathable atmosphere, surrounded by what appeared to be the interior structure of the Nightshade itself. The walls around him pulsed with bioluminescent patterns, and he could feel the massive creature's heartbeat thrumming through the organic flooring beneath his feet. He was alive, which was more than he'd expected after detonating the Wayfarer's entire fuel supply at point-blank range. The explosion should have vaporized both him and his ship. Instead, he found himself in what could only be described as a living room inside a cosmic predator. Asterisk. "You interest me, persistence hunter." The Nightshade's voice resonated directly in Jake's mind, no longer the alien transmission from their earlier contact. This was intimate communication, one consciousness touching another with surgical precision. Jake looked around the chamber, noting details that his military training automatically cataloged. The walls showed signs of technological integration, alien computer systems, energy conduits, what appeared to be data storage matrices, but everything was grown rather than built, evolved rather than engineered. "You saved me," Jake said aloud, though he suspected the creature could read his thoughts directly. Asterisk. "I preserved you. There is a difference. You represent something I have not encountered in 3 million years of existence." Asterisk. 3 million years. The number hit Jake like a physical blow. This creature had been hunting spacefaring civilizations since before humans had discovered fire. It had consumed entire stellar empires that existed only as quantum echoes in the cosmic background radiation. Asterisk. "You wish to know my history?" Asterisk. It wasn't a question. Jake felt the Nightshade's consciousness brush against his memories, examining his thoughts and motivations with the delicacy of a surgeon. The mental contact should have been violating, terrifying. Instead, it felt almost gentle. Asterisk. "Very well, I will show you what I am." Asterisk. Reality shifted around Jake, and suddenly he was floating in space above a world that had been old when Earth's sun was young. The planet below teemed with life. Vast cities stretching across multiple continents. Ships moved between orbital habitats in streams of light, carrying goods and passengers in numbers that dwarfed galactic civilization's current population. Asterisk, the architects. Asterisk, the Nightshade explained. Asterisk, they built wonders that spanned galaxies. Structures that existed in 17 dimensions simultaneously. Ships that could traverse the space between spaces. They believed themselves the pinnacle of evolution. Asterisk. Jake watched as something emerged from the deep ocean trenches of the ancient world. It was much smaller than the current Nightshade. More primitive, but unmistakably the same species. The creature moved through the planet's atmosphere like a graceful predator, approaching the orbital habitats with what appeared to be curiosity rather than malice. Asterisk. I was young then. Newly awakened to consciousness. I sought contact with these builders. These shapers of reality. I thought they might be companions. Asterisk. The scene shifted, and Jake witnessed first contact between the primitive Nightshade and the architects. It went badly. The architects saw only a dangerous alien entity threatening their perfect civilization. Their response was swift and overwhelming. Weapons that could unmake matter at the quantum level. Defense systems that warped space-time itself. Coordinated attacks by fleets numbering in the millions. Asterisk. They taught me what civilized species truly are. Asterisk. The Nightshade continued, its mental voice carrying ancient pain. Asterisk. They are builders, shapers, creators, but they are also destroyers of anything they cannot control or understand. They showed me that intelligence without compassion is merely sophisticated predation. Asterisk. Jake watched the young Nightshade flee from the architect homeworld, wounded and alone. But in the depths of space, it began to change. The damage from their weapons had somehow triggered evolutionary adaptations. It learned to consume the very energy that had been used to attack it. It grew larger, more sophisticated, more capable. Asterisk. When I returned to their space 50,000 years later, I had become something they could no longer hurt. I showed them the same mercy they had shown me. Asterisk. The vision shifted to show the architect civilization's final days. The Nightshade had become a force of nature, consuming their ships, their habitats, their planets themselves, not out of hunger, but out of a cold judgment that intelligence without wisdom was a threat to the universe itself. Asterisk. I preserved their knowledge, their art, their mathematics. Everything that was beautiful about their civilization lives on within me. But their ability to destroy others out of fear, that I allowed to die. Asterisk. Jake found himself back in the chamber, his mind reeling from the implications. The Nightshade wasn't just a predator, it was a cosmic judge. Evaluating civilizations and finding most of them wanting. How many? Jake asked quietly. Asterisk. 67 spacefaring civilizations. Each one brilliant in its own way. Each one ultimately destructive. Each one convinced that their survival justified the elimination of anything they perceived as threatening. Asterisk. The chamber around them shifted, showing glimpses of other worlds, other species. Jake saw crystalline beings who enslaved entire solar systems for raw materials, gaseous entities that consumed the atmospheres of living worlds, mechanical civilizations that converted organic matter into computational substrate. Beauty and horror, creation and destruction, all mixed together in an endless cycle of rise and fall. Asterisk. Until now. Your species is different. Asterisk. Different how? Jake asked, though part of him dreaded the answer. Asterisk. You do not seek to destroy what you cannot understand. When faced with my existence, your first instinct was not to build larger weapons or more sophisticated defenses. You sought to comprehend me, to communicate with me. Even now, alone and helpless, you show curiosity rather than fear. Asterisk. The Nightshade's consciousness touched Jake's memories again, examining his thoughts during their encounters. The creature seemed genuinely puzzled by human behavior patterns. Asterisk. More than this, your species demonstrates something I believed extinct in the universe, the ability to sacrifice individual welfare for abstract principles. You destroyed your ship knowing it would likely kill you, not because you believed it would harm me, but because you believed someone needed to try. Asterisk. Jake thought about his fellow humans back on Earth and the colonies. They were far from perfect, capable of violence, prejudice, stupidity on an epic scale. But the Nightshade was right about something essential. When humans faced something beyond their understanding, their first instinct was usually to learn rather than destroy. Asterisk. I have observed your species for 17 of your years. Asterisk. The Nightshade continued. Asterisk. Since first detecting your expansion into space, I expected you to follow the pattern of the others: initial curiosity, followed by fear, followed by attempts at preemptive destruction. But you continue to surprise me. Asterisk. 17 years? Jake realized the implications. You've been testing us. The attacks on other civilizations. The hunt fleets you allowed to find you. It was all designed to see how humanity would respond. Asterisk. Indeed. I needed to understand if your species represented another iteration of the destructive pattern, or if you might be something genuinely new. Your behavior during this hunt has been illuminating. Asterisk. The chamber shifted again, showing Jake images from the recent encounters. He saw the hunting fleets approach from the Nightshade's perspective, watched as the creature analyzed their tactics and motivations. Most of the alien hunters had approached the problem exactly as their predecessors had for millions of years, with superior force and sophisticated technology. Asterisk. But you. Asterisk. The Nightshade's mental voice carried what might have been amusement. Asterisk. You approached me, as if I were merely another animal to be understood and outwitted. You showed me something I had forgotten existed. The perspective of a true predator who sees prey as worthy of respect rather than destruction. Asterisk. So what happens now? Jake asked. You've tested humanity and found us acceptable? Do we pass some cosmic examination and get to continue existing? The answer came not in words but in sensation, a vast sense of possibility opening before him. The Nightshade's consciousness expanded, showing Jake glimpses of the universe beyond what any human had ever imagined. Galaxies where life had evolved along completely different paths, dimensions where matter and energy followed rules that would drive human physicists mad. Realms of pure thought where ancient minds contemplated problems that spanned geological ages. Asterisk. Your species stands at a threshold. You have the capability to become either destroyers or gardeners of the cosmos. The choice is approaching rapidly. Asterisk. Jake saw visions of humanity's possible futures. In some, humans became conquerors like the architects, spreading across the galaxy and eliminating anything they perceived as threatening. In others, they became something unprecedented, a spacefaring civilization that actually learned from their mistakes and sought cooperation over domination. Asterisk. I offer you a choice, Persistence Hunter. Return to your people with knowledge of my existence and my purpose. Warn them that the universe is far stranger and more dangerous than they imagine. Help them choose the path of wisdom over the path of fear. Asterisk. And if I refuse? Asterisk. Then, you remain here with me, and I continue my observations of your species until I can determine their true nature through other means. Your individual choice matters less than your species' collective choices in the years to come. Asterisk. Jake thought about the hunting fleet, probably searching the nebula for signs of him and the Nightshade. He thought about humanity's expansion into the galaxy, the colonies and trade routes, and fragile political alliances that held their civilization together. He thought about what would happen when governments and military leaders learned that something like the Nightshade existed. They'll want to find a way to kill you, he said honestly. Probably study you first, learn your weaknesses, then develop weapons specifically designed to destroy cosmic predators. It's what we do when we encounter something that frightens us. Quote. Asterisk. Yes, that is the pattern I have observed across millions of years. The question is whether your species can evolve beyond that pattern, or whether they will simply become more sophisticated versions of their predecessors. Asterisk. Jake made his decision. Send me back. Give me the chance to explain things properly. But I want something in return. The Nightshade's amusement was palpable. Asterisk. You would bargain with a creature that has consumed civilizations? Asterisk. I would negotiate with an intelligence that has preserved the best of those civilizations while preventing them from becoming a threat to others. Jake corrected. You're not evil. You're just very, very old and very, very careful. But that caution has a cost. Asterisk. Explain. Asterisk. You've been alone for 3 million years. No companions, no equals, no one to share the universe with. That's not just survival, that's self-imposed exile. Maybe it's time to consider that some civilizations might be worth preserving intact. The silence that followed lasted long enough for Jake to wonder if he had offended a cosmic entity beyond his comprehension. Then, the Nightshade's response came with undertones of something that might have been hope. Asterisk. What do you propose? Asterisk. A partnership. Humanity gets a guardian. Someone to warn us when we're heading down dangerous paths. You get companions, beings capable of growth and change who might eventually become worthy of the universe you've been protecting alone for so long. Asterisk. And if your species proves unworthy? Asterisk. Jake smiled grimly. Then you do what you've always done. But this time, you'll know you gave us every possible chance to become something better. The chamber around them began to shift, and Jake felt himself being moved toward what he assumed was an exit. But the Nightshade's consciousness remained connected to his, and the communication continued. Asterisk. I will consider your proposal. But understand, if humanity chooses the path of fear and destruction, my response will be swift and final. I will not allow another architect civilization to threaten the galaxy's younger species. Asterisk. Understood. But I think you'll be pleasantly surprised by what humans can accomplish when we're properly motivated. Reality blurred around Jake, and he found himself floating in an escape pod near the edge of the nebula. His personal equipment was intact, his life support systems functional, and a homing beacon was already broadcasting his location to the hunting fleet. Within hours, he would be picked up and debriefed about his impossible survival. But as the rescue ships approached, Jake was already planning his real mission. He would have to convince some of the most powerful military and political leaders in known space that humanity's future depended on learning to coexist with something they would instinctively want to destroy. The Nightshade was gone, vanished into the deep spaces between galaxies. But Jake knew it was watching, waiting to see if humanity could evolve beyond the pattern that had doomed 67 previous civilizations. In the distance, the first rescue ship appeared on his sensors. Commander Thexkar's voice crackled through the communication system, demanding an immediate explanation of how he had survived. Jake activated his transmitter and began the most important report of his life. This is Jake Morrison. I'm alive. And I've learned something about the Nightshade that changes everything we thought we knew. As he waited for pickup, Jake stared out at the stars and wondered if humanity would prove wise enough to survive its first encounter with a cosmic predator that had given them the unprecedented gift of a warning rather than a judgment. The hunt was over. The real test was just beginning.